It's August 9th, 2001. This is Elizabeth Townsend. It's an interview for Dean Massaro's Preparing for Lives in Law project with Mr. James Rogers. All right. Well, first question is, why did you go to law school, and was it what you expected when you got there?
I had always wanted to be an attorney, always. I always liked solving problems, and I think I always thought that going to law school would give me the methodology for solving problems. I don't know what I expected it to be. My father was not an attorney, and in fact, there was a remark made this morning by someone who said that they had never been around, and in fact, it was Charles Ayers, who said that he wasn't quite sure why he went because he had no relatives that were attorneys. He didn't even know an attorney, and neither did I. But I had some idea of what I thought it would be. And law school, as I recall, was very, very difficult. The professors made it very difficult because they kept you so far away from them. And they were very distant and very aggressive. And you have to understand that when I went to law school, it was 1959 actually when I started. And there was a lot of the Second World War and the Korean War mentality that was left, and that was the drill sergeant approach to things, where they beat you into thinking, they beat you into working, they beat you into doing everything. And the methodology was to see how much stress they could put on you before you. And I think there was a lot of that thinking left over after the Second World War. So, for example, you would start class and the dean would say to you, you know the old thing of look to your right and look to your left, because surely two of you are not going to be there next year. And that's what happened. My class started with 136 and ended up with about 70. And after the first semester, you didn't get your grades from the first semester exams until 6 weeks into the second semester. And a third of the people had flunked out, and yet were in the second semester of school. So one morning everybody just wasn't there. So it was very, very hard. It was hard emotionally. And I don't know whether the law students these days work as intensely as we did. We worked very hard because you never felt that you met the standard that the professor held out there. You were really reporting to your drill sergeant when you came to class.
So do you think that, I mean, sometimes people say, like, it's getting too soft. Do you think that we should have more of that? Or do you think that it's better to have is that stress necessary?
No, I don't think the stress is necessary during law school. You're going to get enough of that after you get out. And I don't think that you ought to be in an adversarial position with your law professor. You're going to find that in everything that you get into after that, just the very nature of the practice of law, there are always two sides. And you're always on this side and someone else is always on that side. And so the pressure is going to be put on you in the day-to-day practice of law, or the day-to-day practice of business or whatever. So I think that the professors should do what they're doing now, and that is be very supportive of the students, not intimidate them. Because you can intimidate somebody into just stopping, and stopping their thinking and just stopping their interest, and that's not good at all.
What about, there's some schools that still do that look to the right, look to the left thing. Do you think that that's a good part? I mean, we don't do that here at U of A.
No one should do that. That's not productive at all. It doesn't help anybody. It doesn't help the students. They live in fear all the time. They're afraid of being called on by the professor. They're afraid of saying something wrong. Or they're afraid of saying something that the professor doesn't agree with. And that's different from it being right or wrong. And if you feel that way, then your own ability to think is not going to grow. So that's not a good thing. Those law schools, if they do that, are pretty much, I think, the very mediocre law schools that do that.
Yeah, that seems to be the trend of what's happening. Yeah, that they're the last group to get rid of that.
And you notice it in all walks of life. You notice that the coaches in football, the coaches in basketball, used to treat the players very badly. And people won't put up with that anymore. I mean, everybody's become very sophisticated in what their rights are. And just the very nature of how you should treat people in every endeavor. People won't put up with being abused. And they shouldn't and don't have to.
Well, it's interesting because we've been interviewing a lot of people, and they constantly say it's the relationships that they form, it's that they're good people, that sort of out once they're practicing, that people who behave badly or treat each other badly don't do as well. It's just not good for you as a lawyer. And it seems like if you learn in a law school to treat it, that it could begin here, and that this kind of system promotes that sort of community building. Do you think that I mean, as opposed to the other system that has a sense of like, there's a competitiveness that sort of, you're going to be weeded out, kind of, I don't know, that's just an idea. I don't know.
Well, I'm not sure that the concepts really match up. Mm-hmm. In other words, I don't think that it ought to be competitive between you and the professor. Mm-hmm. I think that it's going to be competitive between you and the person that has a different interest. Mm-hmm. If you're in a business deal or in any deal that you're in, mm-hmm. Their interests are going to be different. There are a lot of very mean-spirited people out there. The one thing that law school cannot give you is judgment. And I'm not sure where all of that comes from. I've tried to think of it, and I've thought about it a lot, or what are the components of judgment? Because judgment is the final description of the decision-making process, right? Mm-hmm. Because there are very few absolutes in life. So when you are finally making a decision to do something or not to do it, it is your judgment as to which of if there are two choices, which of them is the better. And so that's a combination of intellect, experience, some training, some disposition, some natural intuition, which probably is a very great component of it. And you can't measure that in law school, and you can't teach it. Creativity is a great part of judgment, and you can't teach creativity. So if you took intellect, experience, education, and all of those components, and you put them all together, then you develop an individual who has good judgment. And there are very few absolutes in life. And so what you're trying to get somebody to do is make the best judgment at the time based upon the facts. Now, my father, who was a very interesting man, used to say to me, it is more important that you make a decision now than you make the right decision later. And when you think about that initially, that's kind of stupid. But he would say to me, if I make a decision today and it's wrong, I'll straighten it out tomorrow morning. So as long as I'm in about the 80% range, if I make 80% of my decisions correctly, I'll straighten out the 20 the next day. But if I don't make the decision initially, I've lost all of that time where I'd be making the decision and then straightening it out. And I've always told people that I don't want to get to be 80 years old and find that I've got 40 years of accomplishments. What I want to do is get to be 80 years old and have 160 years of accomplishments. So the decision-making process for me is something that I tend to speed up. I make decisions very quickly. And I think that I can do that because I think generally my judgment is very good. There isn't one person, I would bet you, in that class that I spoke to this morning that doesn't have a much higher, probably just raw IQ than I have. There's certainly been better students than I ever was. I was a good student, but I wasn't a great student. But there isn't a one of them that, given a set of facts in the day-to-day life, I don't feel that I can compete with, because I really believe in my ability to make a decision based upon good judgment, because I believe I have good judgment.
Did you always have good judgment, or is it something that you learn over? I mean, you gave me all that list, but do you think that you had good judgment at 20 for a 20-year-old, and you know what I mean? Like, do you know what I'm saying? Like,
Of course, I do. I understand. I think that my judgment for a 20-year-old was probably pretty good. Compared to what it is now, not very good. Certainly has gotten better, and I would hope it's gotten better. You know, I hope I've learned a lot of things. But Tommy Hall, who was a professor here, used to say, you'll never be a good lawyer and learn anything from the cases that you win. It takes 100 losses to make you a good lawyer. And I got to be a good lawyer, if that's the test, pretty quick. Because I made a lot of mistakes. But there again, you know, very few things that you decide do they take you out in the wall and stand you up against it and shoot you. So I've always felt that if I made a mistake, and I'm kind of a gambler, if I made a mistake, I would straighten it out very soon. There have been a couple of times when I've been real close to the precipice, you know, and oh my God, I'm going over the side. But it hadn't happened. It hadn't completely happened. So,
can you give me some examples of mistakes? And so, I mean, I think students will see you as perfect, you know, and I think that might help.
Well, we were talking at lunch today. I've been broke twice. And the last time I was broke, I think I was 53 or 54 years old, because I made a very bad decision on a property that I bought that I ended up paying far too much money for, on the assumption that I was going to have a partner. And I relied upon somebody's word when I probably shouldn't have, and they reneged and I got stuck. But it really wasn't their fault that they reneged. The fault was that I didn't cover myself to begin with. I should have known the basic principle that with that kind of money on the line, I should have had written commitments, et cetera, and I didn't do it. As it turned out very well for me. But at 53, I was broke, if the deal hadn't finally gotten straightened out. And so in one fell swoop one afternoon, I went from broke to being rather well off.
So what should students learn from that? I mean, I guess the question is sort of, how do you get good judgment? I mean, how do you, if you feel like, how do you start to trust yourself? I mean, because you could think you have good judgment, but you get not so good judgment. Do you know what I mean? Like, is it, I mean, these are second and third year students.
Well, you know, the people that have got the makings of good judgment already have that. I'm not so sure that you're not wired for that to begin with. I mean, you know, the red wires have to go to the red wires in your brain, and the white to the white, and the black to the black. And there's certain people that have the capacity to do that. I think some of it's environmental. I think that you need to be a touch of a risk taker without being an idiot. So all of, you know, every day, and I'm sure everyone does it, we all rebalance. I'm sure you do that. You get up in the morning and you say, this is what's important to me. These are the 5 or 6 factors in my life, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And yesterday the priority was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Today it's going to be 2, 4, 1, whatever. And you keep rebalancing based upon what's important to you, what's important to your community, what you think is important to life in general, what you think you can do, what you think you can't do. You know, and then you need, there's the risk factor in there. You need to be able to push yourself. I'm 63 now, and I am just shocked at people who want to, quote, retire. It's taken me all these years to finally kind of get things into a position where I can do something. So when people say to me, I'm going to retire, I say, I don't understand that. I'm just starting. I've spent 40 years trying to get it right, you know, and trying to get it kind of all lined up to where I can really take this force of what I've built and do something with it. And so I can't imagine slowing down. I just can't imagine that. And, you know, people say, well, you know, when guy's on his deathbed, the only thing, you never hear him say, I wish I'd spent more time at the office. Well, I'm not quite sure that'd be true with me. I enjoy what I do. I work every day, and I make people crazy every day because I call them morning, noon, and night. But I have a really good time at it. And there has to be some risk. There's sometimes, you know, when your ego is down at 3 o'clock in the morning, and you wake up and you say, oh my God, why am I doing that? I don't need that. But you do need that. And you do need to put it on the line every once in a while. And there have been times, you know, I've given away a lot of money. And I've got a tremendous number of commitments. And this year's been very difficult for me financially, because this economy has turned down so badly. But we'll make it. And sometimes I say, you know, why did I do that? But I needed to do that. I needed to do that for the project, and I needed to do that for me. Does that help you?
Yeah, that does. How does all of that fit with family? We do a lot on balancing, and sort of how much does your family, like when you talked about the 5 priorities in community, what do you think about that part
Well,
of it?
I tell my children, family is everything. The rest is a chess game. When push comes to shove, my family, right or wrong, is going to be first. I mean, I might care what they did, but there would never be any question as to whether I would support one of my children. You know, that's an absolute. They are my child. They are my children. And so that's first. My children, my grandchildren. Now, I probably have not been a very good father. I'm not very attentive. I don't have a lot of patience. I don't spend a lot of time with people. I don't small talk very much, and I should have done that a lot more with my children probably. Then I'm a touch distant, and I've got a little bit of the drill sergeant in me. But still in all, family's first, and the rest is a chess game. One of my partners said to me, you know, if all of your problems are financial, you don't have any problems. And I think that's true. Health problems would be serious. If one of my children had something wrong with them or had a very difficult problem, that would really wear on me. I'd have trouble handling that.
I don't want to, we have lots of things to get to, so I don't want to run out of time. I want to talk a little bit about some of the things you talked about at the talk you gave to the incoming class today, because it was very moving, and I was there to hear it, and I thought it was a really, I really liked what you said. I really liked the idea of the notion of pride and the notion of giving, and that it was all connected, and I just thought I'd ask you a little, maybe explain really quickly, because somebody may not see this that heard what you said, just very briefly that concept, and then I had a couple of questions of sort of how you actually accomplish the sort of things that you were talking about in a little bit more specific. So if a first-year student who heard you today sees this in a couple of years and says, oh, that's what he wants me to do. What exactly did he want me to do, like step-by-step kind of thing? Does that make sense?
Makes sense. Makes sense. Well, how will I answer that? I've spent the last 12 years trying to figure out why people support projects and why they don't. And I started with dealing with the normal terminology that philanthropists supposedly use, and that is that you need to give back. People need to be donors. And I have become convinced that other than in a very few instances, people don't give anything to anybody, period. If somebody came to you and said, I'm from the Boy Scouts, you know, and the Boy Scouts are wonderful people and they do good things, would you give us some money? Mm-hmm. I'd give you $10. And I figure, fine. You do good things, there's $10. I don't have any connection with the $10, and I don't have any connection with the Boy Scouts. If you then came to me and you said, You know, you went through law school at the University of Arizona, and you're a rich man. And you said this morning that everything you have is based upon the fact that you have a law degree and an accounting degree. And that you owe the school, you'd get me for a while. Because I would say, you know, I do have that obligation. I mean, they did make me rich. And I don't have great intellect, I don't have great talents, but I've been very fortunate. So I do owe you something. But that wears out very quickly. And the human mind, I think, is such that you stop thinking that, well, I really don't owe it to them. You know, I really made this. I mean, they didn't stay up all night with me worrying about this. They didn't throw it up all on the table a couple of times and say, let's shoot crap. So I don't owe it to you. So what then is going to make somebody participate? And the concept really is a partnership. And that is that every relationship that I would have, whether it's with you or anybody else in this room, I would say that it only works if I can do for you and you can do for me. And if at the end of the day, both of us don't have more of something. It doesn't have to be money, and maybe satisfaction, and maybe we like to hear jokes, but we need to be able to do something for each other. And so I try to tell people who are in the money gathering business for an institution like this, just don't use the word donor. Just get rid of it. Don't ever use the word gift, right? Tell people that you have a great concept here. In this case, we have a law school that is, 85, 86 years old now? And it is a good law school. You should want to participate in this. You graduated from here. Why would you not want to be a partner in the greatest venture that you've been ever involved in? Given that, if I can then convince you that you really should be a part of this partnership, then you are going to invest your finances in it, because when the day is over, you are going to have gotten something from that. The school will have gotten your finances, and you will have gotten a great satisfaction of knowing that you are participating with a group of real intellects, with a group of great scholars. And where else on earth could you get something like this for such a cheap price? See, so I don't understand when we ask someone who's been very successful, why don't you participate? I have a real problem understanding why they don't understand, so I must not be conveying the idea very well.
Is it only really successful people that should, or should everyone?
Everybody's successful to some extent. I mean, you have to start, that's a given with the people that come out of this law school. They're going to be successful intellectually, and they're going to probably be successful financially. For those who are very successful financially, they should want to invest more. But they understand, most people that have a lot of money really understand money. And that is, they understand that they put in X amount of effort, X amount of time, X amount of dollars to get Y. And so you should be able to convince them that if they put in X amount of effort and X amount of dollars, that they're going to get Y, or that the school is going to get Y, and that they're going to have a percent of Y, and the school is going to have a percent of Y. And all of the other people around that are graduates are going to say, wow, look at that. Look at what a great law school this is. And you know, I made it. I made it that way. Maybe only 1%, but I made it, whatever the extent is.
Well, I thought it was really interesting, that notion that of sort of cultural capital, that U of A could be in that sort of, that by giving, you're increasing your own personal cultural capital in the name of the school that you came from. And I think that's an interesting strategy in terms of people. I think that people get it. I mean, you could tell that people, when you were talking about like the name of Harvard and Stanford, I think there was that pride was already there, that they could be proud of U of A, but they want that cultural capital, and that it is this sort of system that you need to give back. I mean, it's all about money to support what it is. It was a really interesting way. I don't know.
Yeah, why should someone, for example, Harvard Law School has an endowment fund of about $570 million, right? They can, I think, probably fund all of the expenses of that school out of the tuition plus the endowment income. So So why is it that they go to their students or their graduates and they say, you know, Harry, you've done really well in the stock market. Now, we can't exactly tell how much it is, but, you know, we weren't born yesterday morning, and so a guess would be that you've got 40 million bucks. And you probably ought to give Harvard, or you ought to send us a check for $250,000, and they'll do that. And you know what? Harry comes through, and Harry sends them the $250,000. Do they need it right now? Probably not. But I think that they would be remiss if they didn't keep that sort of reinvestment going. Because if you send Harvard $250,000, you're going to want to know what happened to it. You know, people don't send the check and never call. I'm not interested in controlling what happens in this law school, but I'm interested in knowing what happens in this law school. And whereas all of the money that we've ever sent here, there have never been any conditions on it. I really like it when I'm told by the dean or by somebody else, this is what we used it for. Well, that gives me great pride.
And it's, as you're saying, with Harvard, there's a culture that the alumni expect to be giving money back.
Oh, they do.
With
a lot of the schools. My son graduated from Georgetown, and Perry said he barely got off the plane in Las Vegas when somebody was on the phone saying, you know, you just graduated in June, when are you going to send your first check? And after a while, you develop the habit of people saying, oh, you know, I should do that. I had a great experience there. You know, it was a nice school, and it was small enough, and it was intimate, and it did this, that, or the other. And even though the law school is a part of the overall university, we don't take classes in part of the rest of the school as we did in undergraduate, where you take them throughout the whole 40,000 person school. Here, it's a small area. You know everybody, and you can really have an effect. You know, if you gave the university itself $1 million, you know, it's like trying to use an eyedropper to fill the ocean. It's not much money, but if you put $1 million into the law school, you can have a hell of an impact. And that's kind of what I've been trying to pitch. And the attorneys generally have higher incomes, and so they're in a better position to contribute to something where they can have one hell of an impact.
Okay, do you want to say anything else before we move on? I don't
No.
want to get stuck on this is great, but we have I have a list of questions. So, if you want, we can talk about when you're practicing law. But when I thought we might talk about is sort of dealing with clients, being a client, because you had talked about that the notion of you being a client, you having clients, sort of. Particularly to students who don't really understand, what is a client looking for or need? What should a lawyer understand about the client from both your experience of being a client and having clients? And that may be too big of a question.
No, it's not too big a question. It's just a very difficult answer. I'm trying to think, you know, what really created the very good relationships that I had with clients. And I think number one is loyalty. And I'm not so sure that isn't the key to every relationship, whether it's lawyer to client or husband to wife or whatever it is, but loyalty. And that is that you don't, when you get involved with somebody as a client, you can't say I'm going to work from 8 to 5, and when the day is over, my brain shuts off, and I'm not going to think about your problem anymore. It's not like laying brick, where, you know, when you finish laying the brick at the end of the day, the brick is done. In the practice of law, I mean, you really think about, if you're a good lawyer or an interested lawyer, you really think about the clients all the time. Because as opposed to, let's say, practice of medicine, you have, in the practice of medicine, where you have a defined medical problem. The person's got a gallbladder problem. You're going to extract the gallbladder. There is a finite set of facts there, and you're going to deal with that. With the practice of law, you can't do too much for your client's case. There's always something you can do to make it better. And so I think you have to let your client know initially that you're with them. And I think that that creates a conflict between your interests and the client's interest on billing and fee charging. And one of the biggest problems that I think we now have in the practice of law is that billing and fee collection have become the paramount controllers in the practice of law, rather than me being loyal to you to no matter what's happened. Once I take on the case, we're in the boat together, or we're on the track together, and we're going to the end of the track. I had a lot of clients for a lot of years, and when I think back, I mean, we went to the mat on a lot of things, and there were a lot of times I didn't get paid. And I never said to a client, if you don't pay me, I won't do any more work. Never said that one time. And I've had clients that were into me by hundreds of thousands of dollars, and I never once quit on one. And I think that speaks well for how you deal with clients, and I think that speaks well for the profession itself, but it also speaks well for your ability to finally solve that client's problem, and that you don't put a limit. You know, I'll solve 80% of your problem, and then once we get there, if there aren't checks in the mail, I'm finished, you're on your own. So I would go to the end of the track with you if you were my client.
Do you think you could still do that? And
I can do that.
can
Yeah.
someone starting out do that, do you think?
Well, I think you have to do that. I think it's a big investment that you make to begin with, because there are going to be cases that you take that you think you're going to have $10,000 worth of time in it, and you legitimately think that, and the client thinks that, and then all at once something happens, and you end up with $100,000 worth of time in it. Now, can you afford the $90,000 that you may not get paid? I don't know. You make that decision all the time. But, and you may take the chicken and the feathers and the lettuce in order to get paid. But I never quit on a client, not one time. And I think over the period of time, it really did well for me, because the clients that I had, and some are ungrateful, but the clients that I had stuck with me, and there were some bad times that I had, and clients would come through for me. So I think that loyalty is very, very important.
What about loyalty? I mean, with the relationship with clients, do you keep it on a professional level? Do you become friends with them? Do you help them with non-legal issues? It seems like things can get messy, but is that part of being loyal, and that's okay?
I think that's part of it, and I who knows where to draw the line exactly, but when you start representing people on very intimate things, nobody comes to you that doesn't have a problem. And to them, they're very serious problems. And the reason they have come to you is because they've exhausted all of their other ways of solving the problem. And they finally said, I need to go get an attorney, and it's going to cost me some money to solve this. And if you develop that relationship with the client, it's pretty tough to keep it from being personal. You end up going to the movies and you have them to dinner and that sort of thing. But I don't find any problem with that. The one thing you cannot do in any relationship, don't you think, is lie. I won't lie about anything. About anything. And I just really make a point of that. Now that doesn't mean that, if somebody walks in, I don't say to them, hey Harry, you look like hell tonight, your suit's awful. That's not the lying sort of situation. But if my client asks me a question, I tell them the truth. Do you think I've got a case? No, I don't. What do you think my chances are of winning? There's less than 50-50.
Do you think most lawyers do that?
I don't know. I haven't been around that many. I think that some, maybe too many, give false hope. I think some probably do that to extract fees. I think that's very bad.
All right, let's talk about some of the chicken and the feathers. When I was growing up, the story in our family was that my mom grew up in Palo Alto because someone couldn't pay my grandfather the fees, and so that's their house was in African, and that's so I always grew up with these sorts of stories of that's how that we got that or whatever. And I just thought we don't hear very much of that now. We hear about billable hours and sort of do kind of non-traditional ways of paying still happen in the world? Do you have?
I had a client, I collect antique cars, classic cars, and I had a client come by one day, and I was taking him to a deposition, or he was taking me, and I said to him, "Where'd you get this car? It's pretty kind of nice." And he said, "Oh, he bought it at an auction." I said, is it free and clear? And he said, "Yeah." I said, before we go to the deposition, let's go by and get the title. Right? I still have the car. That's 20 years ago. I've taken all sorts of things, interest in this company or interest in that company. And you don't want to, you'd rather have the cash, but sometimes you have to. And I've had clients beat me out of money, but all in all, the practice of law was very good to me. I did very well financially in the practice of law.
All right. What do you think a client wants from a lawyer?
Well, first of all, they want some support and assurance, right? Because they're all rattled to some extent, so they need to be secure. They need to have confidence that you have confidence in what you're doing. They want to know the truth. They don't want to find that the scene is changing every afternoon. So they want to be fathered or mothered. That's what I want. Mm-hmm. And I've been a lawyer 40 years now, and when I hire a lawyer, I want him to tell me, what's wrong with my case, what's good about my case, but I also want him to tell me, or her, to tell me that they have some feeling that we will prevail. And there are a lot of ways to prevail. There really are a lot of ways to prevail. There is, there are strength of personality issues, and that is that I believe that you can't outbluff me. I believe you can't coerce me. I believe you can't threaten me. And so if we're just going to talk about willpower to go from here to there, I think I can match anything that you've got. That to me is very important, because you can't say to me, well, this is a $100,000 case, and you may be right, but it's going to take you $200,000 in legal fees to win it. Because my response is going to be, if that's what's necessary, if I think I'm right, I will spend the $200,000 to get the $100,000. That can have a very chilling effect on your opponent. And consistency is also very important. I don't know whether I'm getting sidetracked on things, but you try to develop a reputation for consistency. For example, I have never made a second offer on anything. If you came to me and you said, I want to sell you Blackacre, it's way out in the middle of nowhere, and what do you think it's worth? I would say to you, let me check on it, and I will get back to you. And I would say, based upon my research, I think it's worth $80,000. So I'm going to make you an offer of $80,000. Now I can tell you that it will never go to $80,001. Never. Because in my mind, what I have done is I have decided what I think it's worth. Not what I think I can buy it for necessarily, but what I think it's worth. Mm-hmm. So if you said to me, well, we think it's worth $100, why don't we split the difference? I don't do that. I would say, I made you the one offer, and that's the last offer. Now it may be worth $100, but when I made my analysis, I decided it was worth $80. And let me give you a list of 100 people that you can call, and they will tell you that I have never made a second offer. Now, I've made some bad decisions because I didn't make the second offer or negotiate. But overall, this methodology has worked for me because I've made more right decisions than I've made wrong decisions. And the wrong decisions were I just didn't buy it.
Okay, I've got a bunch of questions on this. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
So that's very important. The second thing is that if you tell somebody you're going to do something, you better do it. If I tell you I'm going to sue you, I'm going to sue you. If I tell you I'm going to settle with you, I'm going to settle with you. Never threaten something that you can't carry out, because then you get a reputation for being somebody who just blows smoke. Now, those are tough things to come by, because I have looked at things from time to time and said, you know, I may have misjudged that. Maybe I should have offered 85. But if I do, it's going to cost me money in the next 10 deals. So I don't do it. I move on to the next deal.
Okay. I was in a negotiating class, and things got very messy when it was only about money. The class would fall apart. People wouldn't budge. I mean, it just got messy. So I have lots of questions.
Everybody said no.
Yes. And we would get in these, it just was awful. With that philosophy, on that 80,000, when you did your research, did you feel like you were giving them a fair price, or were you trying to get the lowest price? I mean, in terms of, I'm not saying like what you do, I'm saying in terms of students sort of, when they hear this, sort of what exactly should they take away from it? Because I'm afraid of them saying that will just make them even, do you know what I mean? Like,
no, it has to be a fair price. All right. It has to be, a deal has to be good for everybody. If I sold you something, my dad used to say, you have to leave something for the next guy, all right? So if something were worth $100 at max, I would probably sell it to you for 95, because I would have come out all right, and you've got something. I've given you something. So we both come out well. Deals are really not good deals unless they're good for both parties. And you find that if you get the reputation for making deals that are that are good for both parties, that you tear down that suspicion that people have that, you know, you're a guy that's going to grind the last dollar out. So I've tried not to be a chiseler. I've said, you know, maybe I could buy the Blackacre for $60,000, but I really think it's worth. If I pay $80 for it, I'll come out all right. I can build a building on it, and I can get enough rental income to where I can retire the mortgage and do all right. And I have to make a 40% return on my money. You know, I can make a reasonable return. But if I get that reputation, rather than just making one deal where I took you apart, I'm going to make 10 deals with other people, where at the end of the day, everybody's going to say, you know, I got a square deal on that.
how does it differ when you're a lawyer doing settlements or when you're working for a client? Is it the same notion of a one offer when you're working for a client, or is it a different situation?
Well, I think it's the same notion in that you try to get the other side to think that you're going to make the one offer, but there again, it's not your money. It's or whatever it is. It's the client's, and I think you have to counsel the client very carefully on where you want to end up based upon where you're going to want to start. Now, the best negotiating tool is never to want what you're getting. There's no better, and that means that if you don't get what you want, you walk away from it. And you have to, you know, I love cars. So I'm very careful how I go buy a car, because I don't want to get swept up in the love effect. You know, well, the guy wants $37,000, the car's 65 years old, and so what if it's 37, why don't we go to 39? Now, I can get caught up in that because I want to make the deal. So I talk to myself ahead of time, and I said, Jim, you don't want the car. You don't want this car. There are 100,000 other cars. Now, maybe you don't get this 37 Buick, but you get a 42 Packard, and really they're interchangeable. That way I can go and talk to the guy and say, this is what I'm going to give you for the car, and if you don't want it, I'm walking away. And so you have to be able to walk away. Now the problem with your negotiating class is that you really don't have those alternatives in there. You have to make a deal. But sometimes the best deal you make is the deal you didn't make. And sometimes you're better off by saying, goodbye. I'll go down the street and make another deal.
That's good. that makes a lot of
But
sense.
I have trouble myself. My son, represents Andre Agassi, and he's been in some negotiations for millions and millions of dollars. And I've sat on the sideline, and Perry and I have discussed those things. And I can tell you some of the advice I've given him, I don't know whether I could have done it myself. Now, fortunately, he didn't know that I didn't know whether I could have done it myself. So he's tended to take it, and we gambled a couple of times, and we won. But you have to be able to walk away from the deal to make a decent deal.
And that's true if you're on the business side, if it's your money, or in terms of being a lawyer. Or do you have to be more?
If your client, your client may not be willing to walk away from the deal, and your client may not be able to walk away from the deal. I mean, if he's already bought Blackacre, right, and he's trying to sell it, he doesn't have a choice. He wants to get rid of it. Then you have to make the best deal that you can. But there again, your reputation for how you've dealt with people in the past can really be very effective. And sometimes, you want to throttle your client while he's sitting there and you're playing hardball for his benefit, because you can feel him start to move. The body language starts to say, well, I don't care what my lawyer said, I'm going to make the deal. So a lot of times, I don't let the client go to the negotiating sessions.
How do you decide? Do you decide that based on the personality of the client?
I do. Yeah. And some of them, will say, here's a blank check, Jim, just go do whatever you want.
What about the whole thing of how much the client decides what's happening and how much the attorney is deciding? I mean, besides the ethic rules of what parts, who does what. I mean, when it's a more sophisticated client, are they more involved? And if it's a less sophisticated client, are they less involved? Or sort of...
I don't think there's any rule on that. I don't think there's any standard. Sometimes the more sophisticated clients, because they have some emotional involvement with the facts, can become very difficult to deal with. I don't know that there are any rules on that.
Okay. How about dealing with a difficult client? How do you deal with difficult clients?
Well, I think that at some point, I tell my clients, let me tell you something. The practice of law is like the painting of a picture. Okay? We're only going to have one artist. Now, I'm either going to paint the picture or you're going to paint the picture. But both of us aren't going to paint the picture. So if I put the frame up on the wall and I start painting, I'm going to paint the picture the way I want to paint it. Now, you can say yes or no on the final result, but how we get there is going to be my call. With men, you tend to say, there's only going to be one quarterback in this game, and that's me. Now, you're the coach, so you can fire me anytime you want, but I'm going to call my own plays, because the practice of law is so personal to your own style that, I'm 5'10" and I weigh 210. I can't play like I was 6'10" and weighed 185. I have to play with the talents that God gave me. So you can say no or you can say you're fired, but I'm calling the plays. And the day you decide that you want to start calling the plays, you better go get another lawyer. And I've said it just that way.
And have people walked?
Oh yeah, I've had people walk and say, Jim, I can't stand that. I'm a control freak. I have to know everything that's going on. I'm going to call you every night at 8 o'clock, and I'm going to find out minute by minute what you did. And I said, well, you can call, and I'll tell you, but it won't change anything. You need another kind of lawyer.
And have you ever had a situation where you're in the midst of things and that personality comes out, that there's conflict, and what do you do when the client becomes difficult in the midst of things?
I've never had that happen.
Oh.
I never have had that happen. You get the rules set out pretty straight, very soon. And the older you get and the more you practice, you find that you do that.
Do you think that's because you have more authority when you get older, or because you learn more, or both? I mean,
Both. and you're more self-assured, and you also understand that you can only have one quarterback in the game.
All right. What makes a good lawyer?
Oh, there are a lot of things. There are a lot of things. You know, if I boiled it all down, I'd have to say good judgment. But judgment, you know, there again is based upon intellect, and a lot of things are compassion and kindness. You have to have a feel for your client. You nearly have to climb inside them, and you have to become them. You have to be as interested in what they're interested in as you would be if it were your own money or whatever it is. And there's really a joinder. And you know, you're going to tell them, sometimes I'm going to make a mistake. You know, I should have gone left when I went right. But I'm going to tell you that I'm going to give you everything I've got. And one of the things, when I first started to practice law, I noticed that some lawyers had unlisted phone numbers. I've never had an unlisted phone number. If my client wants to call me at 3 o'clock in the morning because they've got some neurotic problem, they can call me at 3 o'clock in the morning. And if they need me to drive across town and hold their hand while they get over the shakes, I'm going to do that. That's what lawyers are supposed to do. And this thing of, you know, when I leave the office, don't bother me and I'm not going to think about your problem, that doesn't work.
Have you ever been scared of your clients? Did you ever worry like someone would hurt you, or I don't know? I mean, we ask that a lot of the criminal people, but I thought I'd ask you.
Well, that's all right. So, I've never tried a criminal case of any sort. Maybe some of my clients are criminals, I didn't know it. But no, I've never been frightened of a client.
Okay.
Never have been.
All right, sometimes I ask crazy questions. Sorry.
They're all crazy. They're all
sorry. All right, what about creative ways to solve clients' problems? As one of the things Dean Massaro has is this piece where someone came in and they realized they didn't really that the way to solve the problem wasn't quite as straightforward as the client thought, and that maybe if they had, you know, that there's creative ways to solve problems as opposed to just looking it up in the law books kind of thing. Do you?
Well, yeah. I mean, the key to success is being creative, isn't it? Mm-hmm. Because all of us have about this, pretty much the same intellect. We all have pretty much, I mean, if we're in an area, pretty much the same experience. So you need to be creative, but don't be cute. And there's a difference between being creative and being cute and clever. You know, I have a lot of lawyers who want to cut a little corner here and not quite tell all the truth there. And I say to them, don't be clever and don't be cute. You know, everything that you think that you're thinking up to be devious, somebody thought up a long time ago, and somebody may have gone to jail for it. So don't be cute, don't be clever. Be straightforward. You can be creative, but the important thing is talking. The worst thing that you can get into is the situation where you don't talk to your client, and then you don't talk to the opposition. Letter writing is a very bad thing. I don't write letters. They're inflammatory. I got into a big beef with a bank, and we ended up solving it, and they wrote me this letter. I called them up and I said, let me tell you something. There'll be no more letter writing. No more. You got something to say to me, you say it. And it was a serious problem, and I said, I'll be in your office every Friday morning at 10 o'clock to talk about the problem. If nothing's happened, I'll still be there every Friday morning at 10 o'clock because we're going to talk. And I don't ever want a lawyer in the room. I was involved in it. I'm not bringing any lawyers, and don't you have one there. And we'll work it out. And we did. And, I mean, our interests were very separated to begin with, but we had the same interest in that we needed to solve the problem. And the key is to keep talking. And there again, don't ever try to mislead your opponent. And there again, don't ever try to keep facts from them. I tend to overtell what's going on. Did you know that these are the facts? Geez, we never knew that. Well, you're going to find out sometime. And when the deal is closed, when I finally made it, I don't want you going down the street and saying, you know, he snookered me. He had that information and he never told me. Now, they're not probably not going to get it set aside because that's not fraud, not to tell. But I'll never make another deal with that person.
You're not afraid that if you tell them, they'll use it against you? Or?
They might. But my guess is that most of the time people are going to discover it anyway. And if it's something that's serious, I probably am going to tell them up front, so that let's get this one resolved right now, you know, while we can. Before we've compounded the problem by you thinking that I knew it and I didn't tell you.
Interesting.
So I tend to call people up and say, let me describe you. I don't think you don't understand the extent of the problem, but this is the extent of the problem.
Could you do that when you were practicing law for other clients? I mean, for clients other than yourself?
Well, I would do that. I would tell the client, listen, we're not going to play games with the opposition. You think you've got a second set of books? We're going to tell them that there's a second set of books. And we're not going to make them discover it. And I assume there's a legitimate reason for the second set of books.
That's really interesting. Okay, so it doesn't have to be the bank thing, but you get there. You say you're going to keep talking. How do you keep talking in the sense of, like, if things are hostile? Do you always just talk about business, or I don't know, I just don't know if you have any tips or anything for people who don't even know what that,
Well, you know, you have to have enough of a reputation that people will know that if you need to, you'll go to the mat. Mm-hmm. And that takes a little time to prove, because somebody's going to test you. And you're going to have to go to the mat. There's sometimes you have to try a case that you just assume not try, but you end up trying it because they've tested you. They want to see what you can do. And then you use that as kind of in storage for the next time that you're dealing with these people. Does that answer your question on that?
I think so. Does that, you think? Yeah. Yeah. All right.
You know, I tell this story. In 1954, Las Vegas High School, it was the only high school in town, had a great football team. They beat everybody. They won, they beat the state champion of Arizona, they beat the state champion of California. We didn't have anybody in Nevada to play. And we had a quarterback, meanest kid that ever lived. And he would start calling signals, and he would tell the defending left tackle on the other team, let me tell you something. I'm going to tell you where this play's coming. It's coming right through your hole there. And sure enough, this team was so big and so strong that that's where the runner would go, and they would just bowl over everybody. And I've always kind of thought that was kind of a neat thing, to just be able to tell your opponent, let me tell you something. I'm so confident, because I've done so much work and I'm so sure of these facts, that this is what I'm going to do. This is what I'm going to do to you. And this is how it's going to end up. And if you can do that about twice, you better be right. So, you know, there again, no case, no, you know, they say no case ever got won in a class, in a courtroom. They get won in preparation. And that's true. Preparation is everything. But there are times when people have to believe that here he comes.
Interesting. All right, so we're going to do a little bit of negative stuff. What were some of your hardest moments when you first were starting practicing law? Either times when you didn't know what to do, or when you thought you might have made a mistake. It's some of the things that students first starting out worry about. We have lots of very successful alumni who look like they do everything perfect again. And it's sort of to say, sort of when you first start out, are there hard times?
Well, there are hard times. The worst thing that attorneys do is hide things. They make a mistake and then they don't tell the client, or they don't tell the senior partner. Because, you remember I said there are very few things they take you out behind the building and line you up on the wall and shoot you. So the worst thing that young attorneys do, it's not making the mistake, it's not telling somebody about it. Because most things can be straightened out. And time is the lawyer's biggest enemy, the passage of time. So every day that I cover up the mistake or I don't go tell my boss about it, that clock is ticking. And the facts probably are going to get worse every day rather than better. So the thing you have to do is you have to be willing to say, I screwed it up. I screwed it up. All of us make mistakes. And it's also very important in the making of mistakes that you've developed a good relationship with your opponent. When I first started trying cases, first year I'd practiced, I developed a really good relationship with a defense lawyer who never would file an answer in a case. Wouldn't file an answer. And, you know, the time to file a default would go, and I'd call him up. I say, Bill, would you please file an answer? I don't want to file a default. One day I finally took 9, I remember all these facts. I took 9 defaults over to him and I said, I'm laying these on your desk. I want your word that if you don't file answers in these 9 cases by next Friday, you will file these defaults against you. He started laughing, and I got the answers filed. So you don't take advantage of somebody like that. See, I could have done him in. I could have embarrassed him. He'd have probably gotten the default set aside, but I would have embarrassed him. Now, that wouldn't have gotten me or my client anything. About 2 years later, I got a case from a lawyer in Utah that was forwarded to me. It was an accident case. And I opened a file on it, and I wrote down the date of the accident, and I wrote it down a year off. And so we had 2 years, there was a 2-year statute of limitations, I think, in Nevada. And I was negotiating with a claims man on a Thursday afternoon or Friday afternoon. It was a very small case. And I thought we had very close to a settlement. In fact, we'd agreed on the figure. He was going to go back to the insurance company and confirm. And he called me up on Monday morning, and he said, I hate to tell you this, but the statute of limitations is run, and I'm not going to pay you. And I opened the file. I about had a heart attack. I opened the file, and sure enough, I'd written down the wrong date of the accident. It had been a year previous. So I called up the defense counsel that I had not taken the defaults against, and I said, I've got to tell you something. I've made a mistake. And he said, what? I said, well, I was negotiating with the claims man, and he said, did you have a figure? I said, well, we had a figure to the extent that he and I agreed upon it, but he didn't have the authority to make the final deal, and he was going to get back to me next week, and I'm busted. I mean, I had just started. You know, it was chicken and feathers then, and it wasn't much money, and thank God the deal had been made on the amount because the client had agreed to it. And he said, I'll call you. And I don't think that it was 3 hours later that I got the check. You know, and that was really a nice thing that he did. I know it breaks me up a little bit, but see, those things are really important because I didn't lie to him, first of all. I didn't really have the deal. But he had the ability to go back to the insurance company and say, look it, you know, this is a small case. I think this is what he said. We shouldn't be trying to stick it to somebody because the statute of limitations ran and some lawyer screwed it up. So I got the money. The client was happy. I was certainly happy. We could eat dinner that week. And see, that came about because of this relationship that we developed. You want to You have to represent your client all the time, but that doesn't mean that you are supposed to take advantage of your opponent. And a lot of lawyers don't. That's the clever. See, I'm being clever. I'm being cute because I've got you where you went away on vacation. So when you come back, there's going to be a default judgment sitting on your desk. You don't do that. You don't do that. That's not in the spirit of the practice of law. One of the big problems that you have now is that everybody needs to confirm everything in writing. There were times when lawyers would call me and say, you know, Jim, you told me you were going to do this, and I would say, you know, I don't remember saying that. I swear, I don't remember it. But if you said I said it, I'll do it. Did I say it? He said, yeah, you did. I said, then I'll do it. I have no recollection of it. Your word is everything. Everything.
Do you think that's true if you practice in a big city?
I don't think it, well.
Versus a smaller community like
Well,
or smaller
your word is everything. Because you have to live with yourself, you know. And I guess that if you figure you're never going to see the other attorney again, maybe you try to stick it to him. So I couldn't do that. I wouldn't do that.
Your story reminded me of what you were talking about this afternoon about obligation to community. And we've heard a lot of talk about all kinds of notions of community of lawyers, of the people the judges that you see. I mean, this sort of, that it isn't, it's what you said, it's not being clever, it's building these relationships and then also giving back to the community. I thought maybe you could talk a little bit more about that. I mean, your story, obviously, that's what it's all about, is building relationships and community and being a good person. Not to the detriment of your client, but a good...
You know, what is really amazing is that, I mean, how much your word and the integrity you have, how much it's worth. Because in most cases, when you're in front of a court, in front of a judge, you can get so much mileage out of the fact that if you say something, the judge knows that you're not misleading him. Because they're sitting up there in most instances, really with no way to check what you're telling them. And if you have an opponent who doesn't have that good reputation, you're going to find that it will really be to your advantage that you have that reputation. Because the judge won't believe this guy if he tells, you know, some people, if they said, today's Thursday, they'd go somebody else go check the calendar. And you never want that reputation. Does that answer your question?
Do you think that's something that needs to be stressed more, or do you think in law school, or do you think that's something you learn, or is it something that you're taught by your parents? I mean, is it something that is true not just of law but of life?
It's taught, well, the problem that you've got is that, in life you can at least move a little bit. In the practice of law you can't. You can't outrun your reputation. So once you get a reputation of not being truthful, you can't ever get it turned around. You can't do it because they always go back. You can say, well, I told you the truth 99 times. They said, yeah, but you lied to me once.
We had someone who said that when you first start out, you'll do something really dumb, and that everybody will remember that forever and ever and ever.
They do.
That you don't mean to, and that's the part.
Yeah, but most people laugh at that sort of thing. There's a big difference between, these are the dumbest things I've done.
Right.
That's one thing, but these are the dishonest things I've done. That doesn't get you anywhere.
And I think she also said that if you're not very giving, I mean, if you had been mean about the other man who hadn't filed the answers, that's also remembered. That you could be a young attorney and not understand. That's going to follow you for a very long time.
Oh, it will. And the reputation gets around very quickly. I was trying a case one time, and the question was whether my client had been invoiced on a huge shipment of lumber. And let's say last November. And so the lawyer put this document into evidence. And he had the client testifying about it. And he said, now is this the bill that you sent to Jones, whatever it is, Jones Lumber Company? Oh, yes, it is. And they got it? Oh, absolutely. Did you discuss it with them? Oh, yes. And they never paid you for it. That's right. So I said to the judge, let me just take him for a second. So I said to the fellow, well, how many originals did you make up? He said, well, we made up an, I said, and is that what you sent to my client? He said, yes. I said, well, doesn't this look like an original to you? He said, yeah, it does kind of look like an original. I said, well, so then you made up 2 originals? One you mailed to my client, then you made up another original that morning? Are they exactly the same? He said, no, they're not exactly the same. I said, when did you make up this document? He said, we typed it this morning. And the judge said to the other lawyer, you come into my office. He said, you let this court believe that this document was the one that was shipped out last November, because it's dated November 11th, let's say, and you typed this up this morning. Let me tell you what I'm going to do. He said, I could get you disbarred. First of all, your case is over. You lose. But what I am going to do is I'm going to tell every judge in this courthouse that you're dishonest. And I'll bet you never try a case here again. And that's exactly what the judge did. And that's exactly what happened to him.
Now, what if it had just been the client who did it? How does a lawyer protect themselves from clients doing crazy things like that?
Well, I think you have to, first of all, you better know your client, and you'll learn them. It doesn't take too long to learn whether your client's straight or not. But you better be very thorough with your client. You better make sure that you have asked them, because you don't want to be embarrassed, and you don't want the client to be embarrassed. Lots of times the things they would do won't do them any good anyway. So they only do harm. So if you're dealing with the truth, well, we lost the invoice. We think we sent it. That's our procedure. We think we sent it. We talked to them about it. But now that you've prejudiced yourself with the phony invoice, the case is over. The judge wouldn't believe you on anything you'd say after that.
When you were talking a few minutes ago, it struck me that the phrase honorable profession is used often. I mean, it's a cliche. You've got this one thing of honorable profession and then all the terrible lawyer jokes. And it seems like we get more people here, and including yourself, that really it is an honorable profession in many ways in terms of everything that sort of goes into it. And I thought maybe, I don't know if you agree with that or...
It's an honorable profession. The most honorable profession. Because it probably has the most effect on the most people. And so it has the greatest potential for good. Unfortunately, there are some bad lawyers out there. But let me tell you something, there are very few. There really are. There are some procrastinators. Most lawyers are very bad at procrastinating. There are some that overbill. But by and large, of every 1,000 lawyers that I know, I would doubt that there are 5 bad ones in there. They may not all be terribly competent, but I don't think that there are 5 bad ones in there. So I think the jokes are overly done.
What do you do when you find yourself faced with an incompetent lawyer on the other side? Is your strategy different when you have someone who's very skilled versus someone who's a big mess?
I'm trying to think back of when I found that to be so. I think that your first obligation is to your own client. I think that you have to, if you can drive home the point, you drive it home. I think that you have to be careful that in what you're doing you don't take unfair advantage. But I've talked with opposing counsel and said, I don't understand how you come to this conclusion. It makes no sense. It doesn't even make sense for your client. But your first duty is to your own client. First duty is to the truth. Mm-hmm. Second duty is to your client. And so, if the other guy has picked a bad lawyer, that's his problem.
I don't want to keep... Oh, I don't know if we're... Anyway. I have one more topic and one tiny question, if that's okay. Since you're so involved with the law school, obviously, I I don't know if you would like to, or if you want to, or if you don't want to talk about sort of the future of where law schools should go in terms of. We've talked to lots of people about sort of their vision of what a law school should be and what it should be in the future. And that's a huge topic for you, I would imagine. But I didn't know if there are things to think about that you want to add to that dialogue. That's one of our sessions is on that. So I don't know if that's something you'd like to do or not.
Well, I think one of the biggest problems of the law schools, and I don't know how they solve this, and that is they're too numbers oriented. And for example, does it really make any difference whether you get a 160 on the LSAT or a 152? I don't know. Does it make any difference whether you have a 3.8 grade average or a 3.6? I really wish that the law schools would do more personal interviewing, because lawyers are not mechanics, and so many of the traits that they must have, traits and skills, you can't measure with the LSAT or with an undergraduate grade average. I think those are good indicators, and I would start with those. But for the size of most law schools, which are relatively small, I would really like to see some sort of an interview, because there are some people that end up in law school that probably can answer the questions but can't practice law, and I think you can really detect that. I've always been distressed with rule regurgitators, right? I can take any book in this room and it will have more raw knowledge of law than you'll ever have, but it can't think and it can't make decisions. So raw knowledge, where I say to you, what do you think about this? You say, well, let me give you a little synopsis of the law. In Maryland, the law is this. In Montana, it's this. 32 courts have held this way. 15 courts have held that way. The majority opinion is this, and it really isn't very good because we ought to adopt the minority opinion. Well, why? I don't know. I just know that this is the majority opinion. This is I want some thinkers. I want some people with some judgment. And that doesn't mean that the person with the LSAT that's high doesn't have that. But I would like to have that increased investigation of the people, because I've run a lot of people through my law firms in the last 25 years who had incredible educations and incredible minds for absorbing information and absorbing concepts, and couldn't quite get it. Big engine, small transmission, can't get it to the rear wheels. And you have to get it to the rear wheels, or the car doesn't run.
Do you think that law school, there's a question of whether it's a place where you should be thinking and learning to think like a lawyer versus learning the sort of practical application of the law? Do you think that we should be doing all of those things, or that some people see this as a place that you shouldn't have that, or that we need more of that, and it's all over the place?
Well, it is all over the place, and the thing is that after you get out of law school, you're going to have an awful lot of years where you're doing the things in the clinics and that sort of thing. So I tend to support, and maybe it's because this is what I went through, I tend to support the education process where it's really book learning, as they say, and then let the practicing lawyers teach you, where the courthouse door is and how you write a motion and all of that. And I think that maybe an internship program, and I think most people, whether they call it a formal internship or a residency or whatever, I think most people really go through that. You start to practice law and you spend half your time doing something, half the time straightening out what you did, and during the time that you're trying to straighten out what you screwed up, you're calling other lawyers and asking them for advice. Or if you go into a firm that's more than 3 or 4 people, somebody takes you under their wing and teaches you how to do what you've learned to do. But I went to law school 5 years, and I had no clinics. And I think when I finished the 5th year of law school, because I had done a master's after undergraduate here, and then I went and did all of the coursework for a JSD, a doctorate at the University of Illinois, the next year. And so what would I have had? 5 years, 150 units, probably 60 units of tax. Every course that I took, I was pleased that I took. Took arbitration courses and things of that sort, to fill in. But all of them were really very useful to me. And I'm glad I took them all. And they were nothing other than casebook courses.
Okay, what about students choosing their classes? There's the whole thing of whether you take a broad, what you just said, you to take lots of different classes that you may not do arbitration, that's not where you're going, but you take lots of broad, or you specialize and get as many courses in what you think you're going to do.
Well, all education has some value.
Right.
Right? I mean, that's why people read at night.
Right.
If you had to choose between, if you were going to be a tax lawyer and somebody said, well, your choice is that you take a course in tax-free exchanges as opposed to criminal law, obviously you'd take the tax-free exchanges. But I've never tried a criminal case, never done anything in criminal law. But I'm glad that I took criminal law. And I know a lot of schools now, a lot of law schools, don't teach criminal law as a requirement. I don't know whether they do here or not. But when I was here, we did, and I'm glad I took it. You can't go wrong widening your perspective on anything. Not much of an answer, is it?
No, it's a good answer.
But that's the way I view it.
It's a reasonable answer. Makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
All right. I think we're almost done. Can we do one more quick thing?
Anything you want. I don't have a plane till 6 o'clock.
Okay.
So.
How about, how do you deal with losing? How do you deal when deals go bad, or when things go bad, or how do you cope with it, or how do you? I mean, you were talking about the 80%, like making, and then sometimes you have to clean up. Do you have any advice on when things don't go quite right?
Losses are tough. They're just tough. But I think finally you'll get to the point where you look at a loss and you say, I can give thinking about this loss 8 hours. Now that's how I finally handle it. I can't grind about this for the rest of my life. I screwed it up. I lost it. So I'm going to think about this for 8 hours. I'm very good about that. I'm a good door slammer. That's part of my past. The door is slammed. I'm not going to think about it again, unless something similar comes up. But I think you need to take a real look at it and say, why did I lose it? What did I do wrong? I may have lost it just because things didn't go right that I had no control over. If you lose a jury trial, the jurors are really very good about talking to you, and saying, well, and it's amazing, I was saying this morning how jurors come to the right conclusion, often for the wrong reason, but they do have a sense of what's fair. And after all, that's what the law is. What is fair given this set of circumstances? And they'll say to you, Jim, you shouldn't have brought this up, or you brought it up and it did this. But the point is that the opponent's position was a better position than yours. Mm-hmm. And this is what we think. So you try to learn about that. And what you try to learn is not so much what's wrong with this case, but what you can do in the future to analyze cases so that you can develop predictability. You see, if everybody knew, what the cases were going to come out to be, right? Mm-hmm. You'd never try a case. And that's why I always wanted my opponent to really be a good lawyer. I wanted a good lawyer on the other side as opposed to a bad lawyer. Because the bad lawyers don't understand what the problems are. They don't understand the strengths and the weaknesses, and they don't even understand their own weaknesses. So you can say to them, you're going to get buried in this case. Oh, no, I'm not. But if you've got a really good lawyer on the other side, you can both sit down and generally you can resolve the case. I've had lawyers on the other side where we would take 15 cases in one afternoon and sit down and just so Yada, 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 yada. And you learned their thinking, they learned yours. If they were properly prepared, they pretty much came to the same conclusion. You know, well, this is a $20,000 case. Well, maybe it's an $18,000 case. And somewhere in there you found a solution. So the losses are tough to take, but you have to learn from them and you have to move on. You know what? I was watching a TV program one day, and they had all these guys on there that were over 100 years old. And they said to them, what do you think is the secret to this, to your long lives? And every one of them came up with the conclusion that it was the ability to withstand loss. Isn't that interesting? Given that they had good health. But if a wife died, you know, they grieved, but they went on. If they had a bad business thing happen, they worried about it, they analyzed it, but they shut the door and they went on. And everybody's going to have losses. I mean, you can't keep from it. But you have to deal with them, and you have to slam the door and not go on and on and on. The grinding has to stop. And if the best thing to make it stop is you just say, I blew it. And there's some great comfort in just saying that at some point. After you've tried to justify everything that you've done, you know, in 100 different ways, you finally conclude, you know, I can't talk myself into the fact that something bad happened to me. I blew it. I blew it. And I'm not going to do it again.
What about when someone else blows it? How do you deal with that?
For me,
Mm-hmm.
I have never had much of a problem of people making mistakes. Once. The second time, it gets serious. But I hired a general manager one time, and I said, I'm going to tell you something. I would rather you do 10 things and do 8 of them wrong than do nothing. So I've lived through a lot of mistakes that people have made. You know, we bought the wrong programming, we've had the wrong anchors, we've had the wrong reporters, you know, but we've made tremendous progress very quickly. We've straightened out the mistakes. I'm a small, very small company, and I have 3 of the really major television companies in my markets against me. And for example, in Las Vegas, I've been number 1 for 17 years. When NBC's been number 3, I've been number 1. When they've been number 1, I've been number 1. And I've done it over and over and over. We do a lot of experimenting. We're very aggressive. You know, we don't take much foolishness from people. We tend to run stories that we think should be run. And we've been sued a couple of times over it. We haven't lost one yet. But I would rather have done that than not run the stories.
So, okay. So if it's okay to make a mistake once, but you're making 8 mistakes, that seems like...
No. I say the same mistake.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Right?
That makes
Yeah, you're entitled to make a lot of mistakes.
Okay.
Just don't make the same mistake twice.
That seems to make... That's
Right?
that's very
The second time, you're going down the road. And that's going to happen to you very quickly.
Because then you just haven't learned anything.
You haven't learned anything. No, and it's goodbye and good luck.
All right, so here's another question. You don't have to answer this one.
I'll answer it.
What's this all about? You've got people, sometimes we have so many people coming in saying why they're practicing law, what their goals are, whether, you know, and there's from all walks of life. And it's sort of like, what are we supposed to be doing here? I mean, we've only got a short time on this planet. We give a lot of time at the law. We give a lot to people. Sometimes we make lots of money. Sometimes we don't. And, you know, most of the students, I mean, some are older, some young. Do you have any thoughts about sort of how they should be looking at their lives? Or, I mean, lots of people are giving us different views, so it doesn't have to be. And you can say no to some people said no, that it's too personal.
Well, you know, looking at it in the broad sense, what all of us should be doing should be raising the quality of life for everyone we can, including ourselves. And so if you take that, then how many ways are there of doing that? From my standpoint, I looked at it and said, I think my talents are such that I can solve people's problems easier than other people can solve them. So I believe I can improve their quality of life by taking out this pain that they're suffering. I mean, I don't know whether you've ever been around litigants, but people that are involved in litigation, it is painful. They don't think, I mean, it is something they can't get loose from. They think about it morning, noon, and night. They wake up in the middle of the night thinking about this. And so you need to relieve their pain. And the sooner you get it done, the better off it is. That's one of the big problems with lawyers, and that is they procrastinate. And they let the client suffer, and they don't understand that the client is suffering. Every minute there's no resolution. So you need to get that done. And I think I do a pretty decent job of that. But other than that, what's life about? I mean, life can't be about much more, or much more than just trying to improve the quality of life. And there are a billion ways to do it, maybe 6 billion, one for every person on earth. So if you want to be a lawyer, the question is, can you use your skills and your talents and your experience, et cetera, to improve the quality of life for others and for yourself? But mostly for others. The doing things for yourself doesn't last very long. You know?
What do you mean?
Well, what happens to a lot of people? Now, I don't, my family was well off, but we didn't have a lot. And so what happens to a lot of people when they make some dollars is that they think there's a great thrill in spending it and having things. So you go through this period of time when if you have one house, 2 would be better. And 3 would be a hell of a lot better than 2. And if you've been flying commercial, it'd be nice really to have your own plane. And, you know, if you go on a railroad, if you like going in the railroad train, having your own car would be nice, et cetera, et cetera. And I love cars, as you know. So if you bought 1 car last year, maybe you should buy 4 this year. And if you bought a $100,000 Mercedes, maybe you should buy a $400,000 Bentley this year. I've done all of those things. And the excitement lasts about 20 minutes. And that's the problem with it. For me, I had a jet plane, and I finally thought, this is absurd. It cost me $80,000 a month to operate it, and it didn't seem to make any difference whether I flew it or not. It was $80,000